Okay, I think I got it working now. Apologies that it took so long. I had a problem getting the recording software up. Okay, so let's not waste any more time, let's get straight to it. So the first thing you asked me was material costs. So let me just point out that doing material costs after the fact, like when you have a complete model already, and none of the measures were taken in the beginning to consider the costs, it can be quite tricky to calculate everything in the end. So I'm going to show you just a few methods that I use when I'm starting out a model, and also while I'm keeping in mind that some of the objects that I use to model are actual things that I'm going to buy from the store. If I remember correctly, that's something that you mentioned, that you already have items available in the store and you can get prices for those. So the method that I use, I'm not going to go to the world origin here. Usually this is where you start working. So for demonstration purposes, I'm not going to start there, so we have a clean space to work on. I'm just going to create a little square. Let's extrude this out. So let's say this is a piece of, say it's a huge piece of concrete or whatever. We're going to make that a component, so select everything. Let me just go back, cancel that. If you click once, select the face, double click, you select the face and the edges. If you triple click, you select the whole thing, everything that's connected to it. So if you go and you create another, this is just a different cube. If you triple click it now, it won't select it, but the moment they are connected, even by a single edge, like so, triple click it, will select everything. So that's just the quick way to select things, and why this is important is if you're in a model and you have a bunch of walls and those walls are all part of the root geometry, that means it's no group, it's just part of the root. It could be quite difficult to go around and select faces and edges and whatever, so it helps to know that you can select the whole thing by just triple clicking. So you don't need that. Also, your selection box, if you look at how you drag your selection, when you drag from left to right, you'll get this solid box, and it will only select the items that are inside the box. So as you see, we only had those edges and that face and inside the box, so it only selected those. But if you drag from right to left, you'll get this dashed line of your box, and it will select everything it touches. So you see it touched these lines and these faces, these edges and faces, so it selected them as well. So that's the two different ways for selecting using the little selection marquee. We're just going to delete this because we don't need it. Okay, so triple click it, right click, let's make it a component, and we're going to call this concrete block. And now you can add a description for this. This is a block of concrete, and you can set where you want this to glue to, like horizontal, sloped, or any. We're not going to glue this to anything right now. You can put it up to always face the camera, so you have something like your 2D objects that are face me objects. What we're looking at is the price here, so we're going to enter a price for it. Let's say we want this to be $50. And we're going to leave everything else blank. You can select the type for it. So there's a bunch of different stuff that you can select for your items. So I only ever use these if I'm making a really big model, like a stadium or a big mall or something like that. Then I'd use these where I know there are going to be different types of the same thing. But for this purpose, we're not going to use that. We're just going to enter the price. So, and when you create a component in your scene, you've selected stuff, you want to make sure that well, this is dependent on what you really want to do, but you want to tick the replace selection with component so that it removes whatever there was and replaces it with the component. So it doesn't really just turn whatever there is into a component, it creates a component from that, and then you need to replace whatever you had selected with that component. Alright, so there we go, we got a little component. And let's say I built my entire scene. This was some wood planks, or it was IBR plating or whatever, and I had a bunch of these, so let's add a few of them to the scene. You just use the move tool, click a point, drag it over, and place it at whichever distance you want. You can enter your distance down here, and then just hit times, let's make it 4. So I want 4 copies, and I'll have a total of 5, which is the 4 copies along with the one that we created originally. Now that we have those, and they all have their price attached to them, what you can do to get a quick output of your components in your scene is go to File and select Generate Report. And with the Generate Report, the default one they give you is the quantities report, which doesn't really give you, like the default doesn't give you prices, or it only shows you what's in the scene and how many of them there are. So not ideal, not exactly what we want. What you can do is you can create a new template, or you can edit this template that already exists. So these are being grouped by the definition name, and it's only showing the quantity. So what we want to do is we want to get the price of these, and we want to add that as well. And I'm going to click Save Changes, so that when I come back next time, it'll already have the prices, and then click Run. And now if you see, it shows you the price, well, the unit price for each of these items. You can then download this as a CSV, which you can open in something like Excel or Google Books, and you could use that to calculate your prices and create like a BOM for your model. And that's just using components that have been named. And in your scenario where you have objects from a store and you have access to all the information about those objects, this is the route that I would go to get the pricing for those objects. Now let's say that you didn't have, that you're not making components and you didn't do that from the start. You have, for example, a wall. Let's create a very, very quick, simple house, and we're just going to give it this makeshift roof. There we go. That's a house fit for a king. Let's tie this off. Alright, so there we go, basic house. And now, if I remember correctly, you said that you applied materials and that you wanted to get the amount of material that was applied to the model. So what you do in that instance is, I've set up my trays to use different trays. So the way you do that is you go to Window, Manage Trays, and I've created different trays for different objects, and I can just select the tab here, and it keeps it a little bit better organized when I'm doing different things in the model. Like I won't be drawing or manipulating the outliner when I'm applying materials, so that's a tab on its own. And then once you have that in a tab, you can click this little yin-yang looking block up here, and that will create the secondary selection for you. So what I like to do is, with my top pane, I have all the materials that SketchUp provides that are available, especially like the colors. Sometimes it's not worth it to use the materials, especially if you're exporting to like a real-time renderer or to Unreal Engine or something like that. Then you'd rather just use colors and give them a name for whatever you want to use it for. Like if you're going to use bricks, you can just grab a brown and you can name this bricks and just apply that. However, for the tutorial, we're going to use the SketchUp materials. So let's say we've got brick, and we apply it to these two models, to these two walls. So now I want to know how much space is the brick covering. And there are two ways you can do this. Obviously, the first way, you just select everything manually, and if you go to your entity info, you will see whatever you have selected, the total amount of area that selection takes up. And that basically lays the foundation for the next step as well. So you go to shading, and you can right click on your material and say select, and that will essentially select everything that we just selected manually. It will select everything. So if you have a very complex scene with a lot of corners and a lot of spaces that's hard to get into, this is a good way to select all the faces or all the objects that has that material applied, and it will display the area in the entity info. Apart from that, you can right click the material and you can say area, and it'll bring this little pop-up, and the pop-up will have your area as well. If you don't want to use meters, or if you want to use like the imperial system with these kind of measurements, you want to go to Window and Model Info, and the very last one is your units. So you can set it up that your area will be centimeters squared, meters squared, inches squared, whatever you want, length and volume as well.